To a sea otter, the world is a swirling blue-green forest of kelp, full of food for the taking. To the world, the sea otter is an agile, whiskered favourite, perhaps of all sea mammals the most appealing. Yet the sea otter has seen some ups and downs in its long relationship with humanity. The sea otter is the largest member of the weasel family. It's bigger and heavier even than the giant otter, although not as long. Once, sea otters lived all around the coasts of the North Pacific, from Japan through Alaska to California. Native peoples hunted them for thousands of years, but the population was not threatened until fur traders found a ready market for the otter's velvety and warm pelt. Then, whole populations were wiped out. Off the coast of California, otters were thought to be extinct for many years. In areas where they have been protected, some sea otter populations have made remarkable recoveries. They find shelter among the kelp beds along the shore. In recent years, they have become a central attraction in aquariums and zoos, along with whales and dolphins. Sea otters are sleek, supple and intelligent. Their endearing appearance makes them popular with merchandisers. The sea otter's recovery began in the late 19th century, and it's been studied closely since then. Under American law, it is forbidden to harass them, and they have become remarkably tame as a result. Sea otters are generally not very popular among California's shell fishermen. The otters relish a large mollusk called an abalone, although it has been effectively fished out by humans. They are equally fond of crabs, especially the large Dungeness crab, which is the basis of an important commercial fishery. The red tag on this otter's hind flipper shows that it is one of hundreds which have been caught and marked as part of the continuing study of the species. An otter can eat dozens of crabs each day, which is why they can be unpopular with fishermen. Before the Second World War, Monterey was the canning capital of California. Sardines, abalone and crabs were caught and canned by the 1,000 tons. When the fisheries collapsed, the fishing industry had only itself to blame, but some of the blame was laid on the otters. Now, what little seafood can still be taken from the bay has to be shared with the local wildlife. Grooming is vital to otters, to preserve the insulation and buoyancy of their fur. Rolling in the water not only washes away the scraps after a meal, it traps more air in the fur. Sea otters are slow and clumsy on land. Of all the otters, they are the most aquatic. They do haul out from time to bask or groom their coats in the sun. The harbour is quieter now. Once it bustled with life. And visitors do still come, although now the otters are the main attraction. At the northern end of the sea otter's American range, in Alaska, its downfall was no less complete, but its recovery has been even more dramatic. Where California has about 1,600 otters, Alaska has upwards of 150,000. Until recently, more than 10,000 of them lived in Prince William Sound, along with killer whales and sea lions. Killer whales still flourish in this remote bay, but Stella's sea lions have declined dramatically in the last 20 years. The rivers which flow into Prince William Sound teem with salmon, returning from the Pacific in their millions to breed every summer. Bears fatten up on fish before retiring for the winter. Very few people live in this wilderness. There are a few towns, like Cordova, the headquarters of the local salmon fishing fleet. Every August, the fleet sets out at the beginning of the short but lucrative salmon season. The otters have had a quiet winter and spring, but now their peace is shattered. Boat propellers and fishing nets can kill otters, but these days, few animals suffer. Entanglement in surface salmon fishing nets has been reduced, and most otters caught are released by the fishermen.
Stand. I don't know how the hell I can get in there and help. That's... God damn.
Fortunately, the Sound is enormous, and the fishing fleet, though busy, is small. Some of the trapped otters, after a short period of recuperation, can be released in a safer place. In the 1960s, sea otters were relocated to an area where they had been completely wiped out. Animals trapped in the Aleutian Islands were moved 1,000 kilometres east to Chichagof Island, where fur hunters had killed the last sea otters towards the end of the last century. The experiment was a success. Less than 30 years later, the sea around Chichagof supported its own flourishing population of sea otters, Chittagong may be cold and bleak, even in summer, but the grey and chilly ocean round its shores supports the otter's main need in life: vast and luxuriant kelp beds, where they can find their main diet of shellfish, crabs and sea urchins. Sea lions share the otter's feeding grounds without competing with them. They catch fish, which live among the slender pillars of kelp. The wealth of food in these misty depths arises from the bottom of the deep ocean nearby, as upwelling currents bring nutrients close to shore and to levels where more life forms can make use of them. In Prince William Sound, the sea otters have a relative living nearby. There are land otters here living along the shore. They are much more mobile on land and rarely compete with the sea otters, as they eat fish rather than clams and mussels. Otters very rarely have twins. They usually produce one pup at a time. In spite of this, they can breed remarkably quickly in favourable conditions. Most females start breeding at 4 or 5 years old and can produce approximately one pup every year. They can live to 12 years. Left to itself, in clean water and with plenty of food, an otter population can recover from a low level. That was what happened in Prince William Sound and other Alaskan waters in the aftermath of the hunting. The hunting here began in the early 1700s, on a much larger scale than in California. It was very profitable. By the beginning of the 19th century, an otter pelt was worth 100 mink pelts, or 10 buffalo hides. The peaceful rafts of females with their young, dozing in the calm waters of Prince William Sound, were easy for the hunters to catch. The Russians were the leaders in the market. Here in Alaska, which was known in those days as Russian America, they recruited, some say enslaved, the local Aleuts to hunt otters for them. The slaughter was ruthless, with no regard to the rate at which the otters could replace the numbers taken. The figures for Alaska are impossible to estimate. Hunters were secretive and lied about the numbers they had killed. But in California, the population crashed from about 18,000 to virtual extinction in just 100 years. It wasn't until 1911 that an international agreement put an end to the trade in sea otter fur. By then, the California population had disappeared, and the Alaska animals were reduced to the point at which hunting was uneconomic. But they came back, even in California, where 50 animals were discovered in 1938 and protected by a government refuge. Today, all that remains of those days of slaughter are a few villages dotted round the shores of Prince William Sound. Here in Prince William Sound, the otters are back in numbers approaching their level before the massacre. Non-breeding males form rafts away from the dominant males, females and young. Sometimes they gather on sandbanks to bask in the sun. Although they are protected by law here, just as they are in California, otters are unpopular with some of the local fishermen, and Prince William Sound is a big, lonely place. Enforcing the law here is no easy matter, and from time to time otters are found which have been shot, probably from passing fishing boats. Bald eagles are known to kill sea otters. Where these great birds are abundant, they may have a significant effect on the population. But there is a much greater threat, not just to the sea otters, but to all the abundant wildlife of Prince William Sound and Alaska's adjacent seas. The pipeline which carries oil from the North Slope oil fields ends at Valdez, at the head of the Sound. Tankers carry the crude through the middle of the Sound, heading for the open sea. What happened to one of them on Good Friday, March the 24th, 1989, was predicted years in advance. The tanker's name was the Exxon Valdez. The oil which poured out of the wreck proved to be the biggest down of all the Otter's ups and downs, as well as a major disaster to populations of every living creature, from birds, bears and deer, to seals and whales. The efforts to clear up the mess were too little and too late. Not all of the Sound was affected. There were miles of shoreline without oil, but this was little consolation to the residents of the Sound, who saw their beautiful home corrupted by a squalor it had never known. But even such a black cloud had a silver lining. These fishermen, who, even if they had never harmed one themselves, still held otters to blame for damaging the commercial shell fishery of the Sound, found their attitudes changing. A strange fellow feeling grew between some of the fishermen and the pathetic oiled otters. The fishermen volunteered their time and their boats to go out into the Sound, into the midst of the oil, to rescue what could be rescued, and to do all they could to move the victims to where they could be helped. Later, funds were to pour in from the public, from the government, and from the oil company, but these first efforts were voluntary, freely offered by the men who, only days before, might have been cursing otters as the fishing season approached. No one knew at this stage what the extent of the damage might be. The first oiled otters were found about a week after the spill, some of them alive, but the majority dead in the water. The dead ones were collected so that fatality rates could be estimated. The live otters were transported to Valdez, to where a rescue and cleaning station had been set up to see what could be done for them. The effort was colossal, with volunteers descending on the Sound from all over the United States and veterinary experts coming from all over the world.
All right, so we're going to take this one, and that one anyway. Is there anything in here? Yeah. Chris. Lord.
At Valdez, the hub of the operation, the size of the disaster became more clearly apparent as every day passed. Otters were coming in by the hundred. The first priority was to give them food and shelter. The less seriously affected animals seemed bright and active. There was an air of optimism around their cages. What the helpers could not see was the extent of the internal damage caused by the poison which the otters had swallowed. Washing the oil off was the first priority, and dozens of animals were shampooed from head to tail.
Good. Oh, you got 'em.
2 years after the spill, it was estimated that between 2,000 and 4,000 otters died in the disaster. But there are survivors, and Prince William Sound still has quiet, clean corners where sea otters can continue to build up their numbers. Their population has been damaged by humanity twice in the last 200 years. Just when it had recovered from the hunting, it was hit by the oil. The sea otter is now recovering. It is a positive upswing after 2 disasters which so nearly led to its downfall.